Hello, I'm Rob Briggs, an adjudicator at the Housing Ombudsman Service. Today I'm going to talk about good landlord practice from the Guinness Partnership. First, some background to the complaint. This was quite complex, including 3 complaints which completed ICP, some of which overlapped with earlier complaints. The main resolution the resident wanted from the Ombudsman was for us to order the landlord to provide an upgraded garden fence. His home adjoins a public footpath, and he was concerned about pedestrians and off-lead dogs walking near to or through his front garden. In October 2022, the resident's cat was attacked by an off-lead dog in his front garden, which precipitated the events that followed and the complaints. The resident's behaviour was a particular challenge for the landlord, which we'll talk about more in the next slide, but it did relate to complex mental health needs. So the complaints. The resident raised a complaint about his front garden fence, and he also raised a second complaint about the landlord's decision about his front garden fence. He also wanted the landlord to install new fencing in his back garden. He raised a complaint about the handling of repairs to the boiler, and just under 12 months later, raised another complaint about damage caused to his microwave by dripping from the boiler at the time it was broken. The landlord's handling of repairs to the front and back doors of the property was also raised by the resident during the complaint process. Now, this is a talk about the landlord's good practice, so it shouldn't be surprising that we found no maladministration by the landlord on all points of his complaint. So what was positive about the landlord's approach? First, the landlord was very clear and consistent in explaining to the resident that it was responsible for repairs and maintenance of the garden fences, but it was not obliged to offer him upgrades. The landlord also explained how the resident could apply to make alterations and install the new fencing at his own cost, and that it would not unreasonably withhold consent for this. In addition, the landlord offered guidance about its aids and adaptations policy and how the resident could obtain grant funding if an adaptation was recommended by occupational health. The landlord recognised that additional fencing would likely have a significant positive impact on the resident's mental health. The landlord offered to install a knee-high chain link fence around the front and side of the property. It explained that this was an economical solution, which would also allow vegetation along the public footpath to regrow. This would also provide a further natural barrier to deter dogs and pedestrians. Third, the landlord's offer put the resident in a better position than he would have been. The resident had declined the offer of the chain link fence. This is because he wanted the landlord to provide a 4-foot high fence around the entire perimeter of the front garden with a lockable gate. He also wanted the landlord to undertake this work under its major adaptations policy. Now, if the landlord had agreed to do this, it would have put the resident in no better position. This is because major adaptations are either self-funded or paid for by grant funding. Landlords are not obliged to pay for them. Now, one of the stated motivations of the resident was that he could not afford to install the type of fencing he wanted. He did have an assessment from occupational health, but they had identified that his needs were not appropriate for its intervention. Therefore, even if the landlord had agreed to the fencing as a major adaptation in principle, this would not have resulted in the outcome the resident wanted. Fourth, the landlord was proactive engaging with the local authority. It obtained agreements from the local authority to replant hedges along the public footpath next to the resident's home. This was with the aim of providing the resident with a further natural barrier between his home and the public footpath. Fifth, the landlord repaired a fault with the boiler, and within a day, the boiler had broken down again. The landlord attended and carried out interim repairs whilst awaiting new parts. It was proactive in considering the risk to the resident, and in doing so, provided him with electric heaters in case the boiler broke down again as a precaution. 6, the landlord continued to engage with the resident despite sometimes challenging behaviour. This was in part due to his complex mental health needs. This behaviour included not allowing access for operatives to undertake repairs or inspections, making unfounded allegations to the local paper that the landlord had attempted to make him homeless, continuously making statements to the landlord that he intended to harm or kill himself, particularly when the landlord did not provide outcomes that he wanted, and continuously making alarming statements on social media and in other public forums about the landlord and expressions of intent to harm or kill himself. This included putting signage up around the outside of his home, saying things like there were dead bodies inside, or that they were not to be resuscitated, which was understandably alarming to neighbours in the area. Now, the landlord was very empathetic, but also very boundaried in its approach. It continued to engage with the resident, repeatedly offered to discuss what support it could offer to help facilitate repairs and inspections, and it also took all of his statements of self-harm seriously, and where appropriate, reported these to the police. Now, the resident was not happy with this approach because it resulted in multiple welfare checks being carried out over sometimes very short periods of time. But in the Ombudsman's opinion, that was reasonable and appropriate in those circumstances. The landlord also engaged with local adult social care and mental health services in relation to the resident's care. Finally, the landlord recognised the resident's financial difficulties and offered to assist him with the cost of replacing his microwave, which it was not obliged to do. Now, the damage to the resident's microwave was as a result of the damage to the boiler. There is no evidence that the landlord was responsible for this damage. Although it's not commented on in the report, it's actually quite likely that the resident was responsible for the damage, as he may have attempted to overfill the boiler. Now, the landlord had correctly advised him to make an insurance claim, and he was dissatisfied that the excess payable was far greater than the cost of the microwave itself. Now, the landlord is obviously not responsible for the resident's insurance premiums, but despite this, offered him £50 to assist him with the cost of replacing the microwave, which is very positive to see. In summary, in our report, we highlighted all of these points as things that the landlord has done very well. That comes to the end of this presentation. I hope it's been informative. If you do have any questions, please feel free to drop me an email or reach out on Teams.